Welcome to this video on object-oriented programming in Python with a special look on polymorphism, which is one of the pillars of OOP. What we're going to look at is simply what polymorphism is, looking at some real-world examples and how it actually works in action in Python. Identical twins. This isn't a perfect illustration, but it does give you an introductory idea. So they might look the same, but they won't always act the same. So they might appear to have some of the same attributes or methods inbuilt into their genetic code, but that doesn't mean that they'll always act in an identical manner. Coming more close to home and looking at Python, the plus or the addition operator is an interesting one. If you look at the first example, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and you can do that in Python. However, it can behave differently or morph. Note the word morph, which is part of polymorphism. And this addition operator can actually morph its behavior depending on the situation. For instance, Adam plus Eve would give you a concatenation of the two strings to give you Adam and Eve. So there we have a type of polymorphism where the plus operator is acting in a polymorphic way. It can perform arithmetic, but it can also concatenate two strings. So this is a definition of polymorphism. It's one of the fundamentals, a pillar of object-oriented programming, and it's the characteristics of an entity to be able to present itself in more than one form. In other words, have multiple behaviors. Feel free to pause the video to read the OCR exam board definition. Here's an example of polymorphism that we're going to look at in a minute. Now suppose you had two classes. One was the student class, that being the superclass or the parent class, and derived from that you had the advanced student. Assuming an ordinary student coming to any sixth form would only be able to do 3 courses, but an advanced student, some sort of genius, would be allowed to override the method, which would be default for most students, and maybe do 5 courses. So this is just an example that would give you an idea of how polymorphism can work. So let's have a look. So suppose we had the class student and we had a set number of courses, self-parameter, of course, and the default is 3. Now let's have a look at the method which also displays the number of courses. And that's done. We're now going to create a class which extends the student class, so we're calling it here, using it as a parameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the same method. So set number of courses, but this time we're going to change the number of courses from the default 3 to be 5 rather. And what we're doing is we are redefining the base class method to behave differently. And obviously from what we've just been saying, that is your definition of polymorphism. So we could also have a little method in here which resets the number of courses. Remember the super keyword there and what it does. You can refer to the previous video. And what this is doing is once you call the super function, the control is actually being transferred back to the base class. So we'll see how this works. So let's look at polymorphism in action. I'm going to go student. Student set number of courses. And this is going to just print let's just add a little end function there so it prints out properly. So this is calling on the method display. Let's just make sure there's no indent problem there. Occur there. So display number of courses. Let's have a look at what happens. I'm assuming that's because of a little s there. I'm going to make sure it's accurate. And it says the number of courses taken by the student is 3. We've just called the student class. Now what would happen, this is demonstrating polymorphism, if we did this. So we have an advanced student, and we're calling the advanced student class, which inherits from the student class. What you'll see is when we call this method, which is student display number of courses, it should, now I've called it advanced over here, so let's just change that to advanced student. Should allow it to work. Number of courses. It's very important to get the syntax completely correct and everything. So it's saying, so check the display number of courses. Have we called it the same thing? Number of courses, set number of courses. See where it's coming up with an error. Troubleshooting is very important. So advanced student object has no attribute number of courses. So what are we looking at here? Set number of courses. It doesn't have just self number of courses. Now this error was a pesky little error. I just paused the screen to see what that was. It's just because I spelt it wrong. So you can see self.number of courses. I've been trying to call something else. Let's see if this works. And it does. And what we can see is the number of courses taken by the advanced student is now 5. This reset function also works. It uses the super function to call the method of the base class again, and it gives us 3. So here we have polymorphism, which has been demonstrated. We're redefining the base class over here, so that the method behaves differently. And here we're using the super function, where the control is being transferred back to the base class. There's another very important few key terms that you need to know to do with polymorphism, and that is overriding and overloading. Please pause the screen to read these definitions. But it's also quite important to understand that, technically speaking, many people, you have various discussions on the internet, in Python overloading is not quite possible. Now overriding is simply the ability of a class to change the implementation of a method. We showed you how that might work. But overloading is slightly different, and it has to do with the parameters being passed. Now if you look at this particular example here, you have a function which is adding 2 parameters a and b, and you redefine the function using the 3 different parameters which are being passed. Now when you print add 4 and 5, it doesn't actually recognize this polymorphic thing that we're trying to get to happen, or overloading. It doesn't recognize it in the same way that it would perhaps in a different programming language. Over here, if you want to look at the presentation itself, a C++ program shows such an example, and function f can be called with either one of 2 integer arguments. So this can't be done in Python, so to speak. Having said that, there is a possible workaround. So if you type this out, you'll see that it is actually possible to call the add function with 3 or 2 parameters and get a result. So if you look at it one way, Python does not support overloading, but a possible workaround is possible. So does it or does it not? The important thing is that you remember the definitions of overriding and overloading. The super function, the super dot keyword, very important. You'll use it time and time again when you're coding, so that's quite important to understand also how that works.